Good evening. If I can welcome you to the November Executive Scrutiny Board meeting. Just
Okay, thank you, Chair. What I wanted to say this evening, Chair, is to ask if we can, due to the length of the agenda, if members restrict their contribution to approximately 3 minutes, which will give everybody the opportunity of giving sufficient time to engage the whole agenda this evening, due to the length.
Thank you for that, Alan. I think that's a reasonable suggestion. It is a lengthy agenda. What I don't want, and I know other members feel the same because I've had a word with them, we don't want to concentrate and spend 2 hours on like two items, and then suddenly find we're getting towards 8:30, 9 o'clock, potentially, and then we're rushing items. So I would ask members to just think ahead. I don't want to cut down democracy and debate, but if people can try and keep their contributions to 3 minutes, I'll similarly ask officers to try to do the same if that's appropriate as well. So if we can proceed in that mind, then I think the meeting will go swimmingly. Okay, right. Any apologies?
Chair, we've had apologies from Councillor Matthew Holmes, and I will minute it that he's given his apologies this evening as there may have been a conflict of interest on a number of items with him recently being a cabinet member, so it was easier, I think, rather than going in and out of the room all evening, and I'll minute that.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.
Okay. If there's no other apologies, I have no late items to introduce, apart from a comment I think Sarah will make under item 7. So let's move forward anyway. Item 4, minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of October. They're attached. Any comments on those? Item 5, the forward plan. You've also had copies of
Chair,
the forward plan.
Can I move the minutes?
Sorry, Lucy?
Can I formally move the minutes?
Can you formally move the minutes? Yes. Thank you. Okay. Any second of that? Yep. Thank you. The forward plan, item 5, that's attached for you to note. Item 6, Council Cabinet responses to scrutiny recommendations, similarly is attached to your papers this evening. Item 7, Sarah, I know you want to talk to this, and where's Sarah? Is at the back. And make a request that item 15 be dealt with the first item of the Cabinet agenda. Sarah, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. In relation to item 7, this is usually the Executive Scrutiny Board performance plan, and we had scheduled to look at the impacts of COVID as part of the but this has been delayed, and the proposal is that we look at this with the Chair outside of the meeting in terms of the timing of the Executive Scrutiny Performance Plan. The other item for consideration at this meeting was the Q2 performance report, and I will very quickly provide the board with an overview of that document. So the report covers the period from July to September of 2021, although many of the areas reflect the cumulative position since the start of April. The report provides an update on progress against commitments made within the recovery plan, including priority performance measures, actions, projects and strategic risks. Alongside noting the Q2 performance results, there are a number of areas that Cabinet are asked to approve this quarter. That is, a minor amendment has been requested to the recovery plan. When the plan was approved, it was agreed that it would remain a dynamic plan and any changes would be requested for approval through the quarterly performance monitoring process. So one measure has been proposed for deletion and one milestone is to be divided into 2 parts to allow more accurate recording. And this is presented in paragraph 4.4 of the report. And as identified in the Q1 report, there are targets for appropriate performance measures that we are reintroducing into our performance monitoring framework, and they are set out within Appendix 2, alongside analysis of performance in relation to these targets included within the report. So very quickly, key headlines to note: based on the Q2 outturns, 94% of measures are forecasted to achieve their target. At the end of September, 91% of our priority actions were assessed as either on track or completed, which has improved from the position reported at the end of Q1, and 75% of our priority projects have been assessed as either green or amber green. We have 18 strategic risks within our strategic risk register that are presented throughout the report with further details in Appendix 1. An overall summary of performance is presented within Appendix 1, and a summary of achievements and areas of risk threat are presented within the covering report. In terms of progress since Q1, there have been 3 risk reviews completed in the last quarter, as we identified would be completed in Q1. 1 risk score has been reduced as further definition has happened, and there are no performance surgeries recommended this quarter, but there are a number of risk reviews which will continue. I'm happy to take comments on the report.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for that. Any comments, observations, contributions? Lucy, bearing in mind the 3-minute recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. It's actually a question about process, in that the 4.4 talks about a couple of things that are being reviewed and changed. What is the process for getting items onto the list of monitoring, or suggesting they no longer need to be there? Who does such changes go through, and what is the procedure?
Thank you, Lucy. Sarah, could you come back?
Yep. So depending upon what the change is, it depends on where the source comes from. If it's part of the strategic risk register, that will happen automatically, as it's important that we continue to report on what are our current strategic risks. So that will come through risk owners, and that is discussed through our corporate risk management group and corporate leadership team and strategic leadership team. In terms of proposed amendments to the plan, that will come if they are existing measures or actions through the action or measure owner, if they feel that there needs to be a change, and any additions or deletions are considered through strategic leadership team with appropriate recommendation made to Cabinet, which is the areas that are presented in 4.4.
Thank you, Sarah. Are there any other comments or contributions? No, if not, thank you very much, Sarah, for attending. We'll now move back to the agenda proper. The first key decision area is item 10, the future management of Alistry Park. Claire, are you taking us through this? Thank you. Thank you, Claire.
Chair, are we going to consider item 8, access to Rainsway Household Waste Recycling Centre?
Sorry, just bear with me. Yeah, my apologies, Lucy. Yes, sorry, if you can just hold fire there. Item 8, my fault. The minute extract from the council motion, access to Rainsway Household Waste Recycling Centre. Who's taking us through that?
I will, Chair.
Sure, thank you.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. I'm Sam Dennis, Director of Public Protection and Street Pride. Members have received a copy of the report which followed the council motion to reinstate the previous opening hours and arrangements prior to COVID. And officers have put together a report for Cabinet to consider around that. The report recommends that the operating model is maintained. And I just wanted to highlight, on the basis of being brief in this meeting, is just a few key points around that. So whilst the measures were put in place to support the coronavirus pandemic, there were actually some unintended consequences or benefits of that, which generated a 575k saving that contributed to and was taken out of the budget as part of the MTFP. In addition, through COVID, there's been an increase in waste collected in the bins at the curbside, which has generated an additional pressure on waste collection budgets of £1.1 million, as demonstrated in section 4.9. So from a financial perspective, the council's not in a position to be able to re-implement that operating model. In terms of providing a service, slots are currently available on the same day at the site, and the table in 4.6 shows some slot availability data over time to demonstrate some improvements in that around access. And the table in 4.10 shows that in terms of the restriction to 12 visits a year, most people only go a few times, with very few people going 12 times a year, and actually nobody's been more than 12 times a year, and that table is contained in 4.10. So therefore, the officer recommendation, Chair, would be to maintain the current operating model at Rainsway.
Right, thank you. Now, this will be debated tomorrow night, I presume, at full Cabinet, but Councillor Dinser?
Thank you, Chair. I have to say I'm disappointed with the recommendations from on this report for going to Cabinet tomorrow. It is ignoring the will of the Council in terms of the resolution it passed. I do understand that the Executive can make decisions based on their view, and this report by officers is recommending that there are reasons why we should not go back to what the Council resolution proposed by me, is that increase the number of hours of opening and offer choices which was more than just the online booking system and the telephone contact booking system. The reasons given by the officer just now is that there was unintended consequences of savings of 575, but also £1.1 million worth of extra tonnage because of the behaviour of individuals, which I think amounts to 8% increase in black bin curbside collection and about 18% in terms of blue bin recycling collection. The 18% blue bin is a positive in terms of more being collected. And then I think the example given 4.10, that the number of take-ups for 12 months, up to 12 months is low. I feel that the conclusion for that is flawed, because since July, when the new system came into place, there's only been 3 months of data. And if you're going to make a sort of comparison, you do need to look at least 12 to 18 months before you can come to any conclusions that the offer is mostly for 1 or 2 visits rather than further. The data also is trying to demonstrate that because there's been an increase in booking availability, there's still capacity. Well, one of the arguments of the resolution was that those people who can use online booking will do so, and they will actually have a positive experience. But there are many that may not be able to use that facility, and therefore it's not surprising that online use is probably at a maximum or as full as they can do, but that doesn't go away from the fact that there may be others who cannot access or are unable to, for whatever reasons, to do that. And I know, and many other councillors know, that leads to fly tipping increases and the rubbish and the environmental impact, which is particularly felt in urban built-up areas with terraced properties. So I am concerned that this is the recommendation, and I hope tomorrow there will be a change in heart by the Cabinet and actually restore better accessibility for household waste recycling.
Thank you, Councillor Dinser. I'm sure this will be taken up tomorrow night by various parties. Lucy.
Thank you. I really shouldn't start by saying should I? Can I just clarify, first of all, that the 76 bookings that are mentioned were all from one person in the early introduction to the thing. And I just want to make the point that although our changes have reduced the number of people coming from elsewhere to use our facility, I know that there are a lot of people on the western side of Derby who think it's actually easier to go to Ashbourne, and therefore we're adding to others' burden by the way it's being operated at the moment. And it may well be that Derbyshire will be reviewing that. In paragraph 4.9, it talks about the £500,000 saving, but we also know that there's a £1.1 million of growth, which presumably is a mixed area of growth between black, blue and brown bins. I think the two need to be looked at together, because it may well be that people are putting stuff into their black bins, which they would otherwise have taken to Rainsway. They may be using neighbours' black bins. And which case, it may well be that we're actually seeing a reduction in the total potential for recycling, because people don't have the options of separating items out in their black bin. And I don't know if that's been looked at. So that's the second thing I'd like an answer to. The third thing is in 6.1, other options. I'd like to know why 6.1 was not recommended. It just says not recommended, but there's no reasons going. And finally, there was quite a lot of discussion in the debate at full council about access, or at least from me, access on foot or by bicycle to the site. Because obviously when you get there, you get out of the car and move around. And for people who do not have access to a car, having access by foot or by cycle may be an equalities issue. And for people who are conscious, who don't have a big thing to take, maybe some waste paint, for example, they could realistically be going there without needing a car, but still to enable materials to be recycled, and that is better for the environment and climate change. So, Chair, if I can give answers to those points. Thanks,
Lucy. Could I have a response, please? Thank you.
Sure. So in terms of the savings, Councillor Kerr, so I think what officers were trying to get across in the report that the 575 has already been taken out of the budget. So reinstating the opening hours would have added the additional pressure with the extra tonnages as well. So it wouldn't have been a 575 budget increase. It was the additional increase as well. It was a cumulative pressure on waste services. In terms of looking at the types of waste that are going into the curbside collections and into the HWRC, in general, most of the items that go to the HWRC are the bulk items that people can't fit in the bin, so furniture, you know, when the DIY sort of house clearance, etc. But there will be some element of black bags waste taken in there. What we haven't done is modelled exactly what that is, and we've looked at the tonnage combined. In terms of the question around foot and cycle access, the operating model is a parking bay and access to the different waste streams via the parking bay, and that's standard in most recycling centres. That said, there are some areas of the recycling centre where people can walk to. I just think it's perhaps in terms of taking waste to a recycling centre on a bike, I'm not sure that's the safest way to transport it. So we don't see much of that. We're not saying I think it's a safety area, Councillor Kerr. You know, you couldn't put a bulk item on a bike and take it into a household waste centre. And just to address 6.1, in terms of that opening up in line with the seasonal operating model, what we looked at is what our contract currently states with HW Martins, and apologies for not putting it in there. So we pay a fixed fee, and actually to open up in a seasonal model, we'd have to pay a fixed fee as if we were opened up all year round, so the budget pressures wouldn't allow that.
Thank you. I've got Mike Kerr. Sorry, Mike Carr, sorry. I'm marrying you two together. Sorry, Mike. My apologies, Mike. Okay. And then Alison Martin Repton.
Oh,
yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Me? Yeah, sorry. Chair. I fully support everything Councillor Dinser said, and I would just point out that in 4.4, where it makes a big thing about trade waste, and I agree they should not be coming there, but 76 in 18 months is one a week. It's hardly a big deal, Chair.
Alison.
Thank you, Chair. Just to also endorse what Councillor Dinser has said, but also Councillor Kerr. I mean, I do appreciate there are practical difficulties in operating a site like this, but to say that it's too dangerous for somebody to turn up on a push bike, I just don't find that convincing, to be honest. And even if that were the case, I think the site should facilitate some access by bicycle. There are people, I grew up in a family without a car. We did cycle places. You know, this is a reality for some people, and for some people it's a choice. So I would actually ask that is actually looked at rather than presented as a fait accompli. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Hardy, do you want to come up fairly quickly? Yep.
Chair, in light of some of the comments I've just heard, and in light of the continued ignoring of the council's will, I'd like to propose a resolution to go to Cabinet tomorrow. And that is to say that the data and the anecdotal information within the report I do not feel is sufficient, or this Executive Scrutiny Board feels is not sufficient for the recommendation which is being put forward to Cabinet tomorrow. We need to enable more accessibility for more people who are unable to use online booking systems as a way of removing their household waste. We need to do this urgently, and this board recommends that the Cabinet do not follow the recommendation in the report and maximise and implement the resolution passed by full council on this, the opening and accessibility to the household waste recycling centre.
I'll just allow Stephen.
I hope that was slow enough to get it.
Have you been able to capture the essence of that, Stephen? Okay, thank you. Yeah, sure.
Well, it's just to say I fully support that resolution. It's quite clear, regardless of the contents of the report, that across this, members of this chamber, right, many members of this chamber use tips outside of the city to dispose of their own waste, let alone the residents in the city. Now, that tells me straight away that we have a problem with the tip in this city. And if towns like Merthyr Tydfil can have 2 tips and resolve this issue, we should easily be able to solve this problem. So purely on the basis that members of this very committee use tips in other areas and leave the city shows that our system is inadequate and we need to improve the system. So I fully support the motion.
Right, thank you. I'm going to put the recommendation to committee now. Do you want to, could you take us through it, please, Stephen?
Thank you, Chair. So I've captured the essence of it for you, Councillor Dinser. So basically, the Executive Scrutiny Board resolved to agree that the data and information in the report is not sufficient for the recommendations to be taken to Council Cabinet tomorrow. And the Executive Scrutiny Board, just give me a second, would like to maximise and enable accessibility, online bookings and the recycling of household waste at the site.
Could have those in favour of that recommendation please indicate?
That's
those
6
against?
in favour, Chair.
I think the
4 against, Chair.
The motion is passed. Okay, thank you very much.
Chair, thank you, Chair. I also have a recommendation which I hope people will support, which is to recommend to Cabinet that in recognition of our need for action on the climate emergency and for reasons of equality of access for those without cars, that officers look into how to open up access to the Rainsway recycling site to allow, I'll give you its proper title, to allow people to bring items on foot and by bicycle, including cycle trailers.
Have you written down?
I will send it through, yeah.
You just send it to Steve. Okay.
I've just got to correct the title. What's the official title of the Rainsway?
I think Councillor Dinser would like to second that. Okay.
Yes, Chair, I would like to second that on the basis that we need to maximise every way we can
Absolutely.
accessibility to the household waste recycling centre.
Yeah. If you could read it out, please, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. So the recommendation to Council Cabinet is that in recognition of our need for action on the climate emergency and for reasons of equality of access for those without cars, that officers look into how to open up access to the Rainsway Recycling Centre site to allow people to bring items on foot and by cycle, including cycle trailers.
Okay, we have the recommendation. Those in favour, please show. Those in favour of the recommendation, please show. Those against, please show. That has passed. Thank you.
6 in favour, Chair. Yep, none against.
Thank you very much. Okay. To item 9. This is the minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of September. Children and Young Persons Board. Who's taking us through that? Is it item 9? Is anybody speaking to item 9 at all?
Chair, wasn't planning on,
okay.
But have seen those minutes and the recommendations that are there, and I need to get an update on where we are with the Cabinet member and others.
Thank you very much. Okay, any contributions to item 9? No, if they're not, then thank you very much for that. We're moving on. Item 10. Back where we were. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Chair. Claire Davenport, Director of Leisure, Culture and Tourism. This report looks at the opportunity for Alistry Park to be repurposed.
Sorry, Claire, is it possible, because I know there's a number of us of a certain age and that these microphones aren't the best for, if we can perhaps get as close to them as possible and speak up, that'd be helpful. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Chair. So the report looks at an opportunity for Alistry Park to be repurposed and managed in the future to enhance biodiversity and to help climate change whilst maintaining public access and helping to improve health and well-being of the people of Derby. This is really a good initiative that will enable co-production of the park with Derbyshire Wildlife Trust, supported by Rewilding Britain and Alistry Friends Groups, the University of Derby and the Earl of Harrington Angling Club. Derbyshire Wildlife Trust have kindly attended this evening's meeting and are happy to answer any questions. The full consultation exercise will be carried out, and this will inform a consultation plan. This will ensure that the proposed rewilding of Alistry Park is co-created with key stakeholders and the people of Derby. The detailed proposals will come to a future Cabinet in due course. The benefits include contributions to climate change. Rewilding Alistry Park will place Derby as a leader in nature's recovery in an urban setting. We had a visit from Rewilding Britain, who attended the park alongside Derbyshire Wildlife Trust, and they felt this was a nationally significant project compared to the many thousands of sites that they had visited across the country. Alistry Park is a good open space, and locally it offers the perfect opportunity to kickstart the development of a wider, more connected Derby. Other benefits include providing more nature-rich habitats and potential new species reintroductions. It will contribute to carbon reduction targets, provide a natural health service for people of Derby to connect with nature, and provide a more vibrant, green and attractive place to live and visit. Restoring natural habitats, increasing biodiversity and providing spaces for nature to re-establish itself will put the nature at the heart of a green post-COVID recovery. The next steps for the report, Chair, are in paragraph 4.9, and I'll leave it there for questions if required. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. Before I open it up for discussion and intervention, I know the park very well. I've been using it for over 60 years. I sledged there in 1961. I sledged there with my grandson only a couple of years ago. There are a number of comments that have been made to me by people, because there are different views on this, and there are reservations that need reassurance on. Now, we do have Joe Smith from the Wildlife Trust, who's here this evening, to answer any questions. If there are protracted questions that you may have, I'd invite you to take those outside of this meeting because of the constraints that we've got in terms of time. So these are some of the concerns. There's a question mark about whether the consultation were meaningful following the Cabinet denying the will of the Council to talk to the potential parties who are interested in taking over the golf course. And we do understand there's a potential legal challenge ongoing with regard to that lack of openness and transparency. That's one issue that's been raised with me, and I was asked to raise it this evening for us to at least consider. Another comment that was made to me is it is a park and not a nature reserve. And the concerns are that they don't want just a series of footpaths through the park. We have thousands of miles of footpaths throughout this city and this county, and we need to have more than that. Yet there are other people who are saying we don't want it to be a glorified theme park with glamping pods, zip wires and other commercial activities. So there are a number of people who maybe are conservative with a small c, but they want to retain what they've had for many decades, and there is a fear that we may lose some of that if we're not careful. So people do want that consultation to be meaningful. And there are other concerns that it's just a cost-cutting exercise, and this is PR window dressing to cover the fact that maintenance costs will be substantially reduced. Now, some of these comments and concerns I share to a larger or lesser extent, but they are comments that have been raised with me, and I've been asked to raise them this evening. So I throw that in for starters. Who else would like to contribute this evening? Hardiel, first of all.
Chair, I'm a supporter of rewilding and sort of bringing back to nature vast amounts of our countryside. If it's been sort of domesticated wherever and widely. I do share your caution, but also say that subject to the Ombudsman's investigation and then the legal challenge sent to central government, subject to what the conclusions of that are, because openness and transparency has been questioned, as you say, by a number of groups, and they've certainly approached me as the chair of the Communities and Neighbourhoods Board, and I've raised that. I have deferred a look at the option for the golf course transparency until January on the basis of the investigation going on. So subject to that, we do need to see how we can make this park accessible and available for the people of Derby. It can't be totally made wild, as you've said, so the consultation needs to take that into account and be meaningful in terms of what people want. Rewilding can mean many different things to many different people. So generally I'm supportive of that as an approach, but there are a number of things we need to take into account in this process.
Thank you for that contribution. Are there any other councillors? Councillor Martin.
Yes, thank you. I mean, I'm generally in favour of this. I would also like to add the point about the fact, though, that it is a park. We do have miles and miles of countryside, the other side of the park, really stretching up to Wirksworth and beyond, where obviously we have to concentrate on rewilding the vast acreage of farmland to some extent. So we mustn't see this as the only opportunity to for rewilding in the area. But I'm not against this at all. I'm largely in favour of it, but I do think it's absolutely critical that the consultation is meaningful. For example, the way the report from the Derbyshire Wildlife Trust refers to the park now doesn't totally recognise what the park is. It's already quite a wild space, particularly since the golfing ceased. We already have harebells coming back into the grass where it's grown, where it's not been mown this year. We already have badgers, foxes, rabbits, all sorts of wildlife. Owls live in the park, lots of waterfowl, water birds, and also rodents in the water who visit people's gardens frequently, as I know. So basically, my point would be, it's not this manicured space already that requires this dramatic intervention. It may require some intervention, and I think that could be positive, but I would share everybody else's concerns that it does need to be retained as a fully accessible park with areas where people can just get out a football or a cricket bat and just knock things around. So some mowed grass is my point. So I think it's a 2 cheers from me, and let's have a very meaningful consultation. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Lucy.
Thank you. The report starts very enthusiastically as a justification about climate change and the impact of the nature emergency as well. And then we read on to, the third option is talking about introducing cattle and deer. Now, cattle and deer are contributors to climate change. And I'm just a bit concerned that we've got a report here which is going in one direction at the beginning and then going in another direction at the end. So that may well be a question, Chair, for some response to that. The second thing I'd mention is that this, as the report also mentions, this is an historic landscape in terms of its golfing past. Derby is quite good at destroying bits of its history over the decades, and I think this is an example where in the future people might actually like to have that history maintained, and potentially archaeology by the time it's looked at maintained. So the talk within the report of some of the sort of structures being built and reorganising it to maybe make allotments or similar, I think some of that might be destructive of the integrity of the historic environment, and I think we should avoid that for our future Derbyans' interest. And finally, there's a timetable in the appendix which suggests employing somebody pretty well now, but yet we don't seem to have any finance. And I just wondered, as there's no mention in the financial implications of further employment or whatever, as to whether the timescale is wrong or whether there's going to be a new post created or whatever. What's the vision for that, please? Apart from that, I think it's I like the idea of rewilding. I know that there are people who would be really sorry to lose the golf course. But rewilding is needed not just in the edge of the city by Elstree, but we need to look at rewilding opportunities, particularly in areas which are far more urban in nature than at the extremity, and the value that will be for rewilding in other parts of the city could be for the community of people could be significantly more than in this location. So as a concept, it's great. This location isn't necessarily the priority.
Thank you, Lucy. Just before I'll bring in Councillor Prosser, and then I'll bring in Alan, and then I'll go back to Claire. Councillor Prosser, thank you.
Well, personally, I think enhancing the environment, improving the habitat, all fantastic. I am very concerned over this document, which starts all very upbeat, and by the end of it seems to justify simply stopping mowing the grass as a way to cut cost, which is my summary. When you get towards the end of the document, the final option is literally, well, we just leave it. And that, to me, is really concerning, because it seems that the whole document is written to just excuse us to stop sending people out cutting the grass. I often go down the Arboretum Park, and many of you will be familiar with the wildlife area there. It's a gated off area that's locked. It's used very rarely through the year, and some people would celebrate that. But that's the area, where Percy Thrower learnt and taught his trade. He provided enjoyment, biodiversity, and lots of food for bees and insects. And I can't believe it appears to be, a step forward where these areas will end up getting locked or just turn into bramble patches. So, the habitat, species, all very important. We can do better, but we need to make sure that it's not at the loss of a really great asset. And at the moment, we do have a really great park. And all right, it's been poorly looked after for many years in many areas. but we can have areas, we can improve the habitat, we can improve the nature, but we can still keep a very good park, and the two could go hand in hand. There is no reason why a biodiverse area surrounded by wild areas couldn't be all the way around a functioning golf course. I mean, they're perfect for this kind of environment, and I think it's a little bit cheap or a little bit bland just to pretend that, you know, it's one or the other. We could make really good use of this asset, and rewilding the whole park appears by this document, from my reading of it, to be an excuse to stop mowing the grass. And that's my take on that document.
Thank you, Councillor Prosser. Councillor Grimmadale.
Thank you, Chair. Derby is very, very lucky to have such great parks. We've got the Arboretum, which is the UK's first national park, Darley Park, which I use very regularly, walking around Darley Park leading on to Chester Green, Markeaton Park, a fun park for the children of Derby, and we come to Alistry Park. And I welcome this vision, and I support the Derbyshire Wildlife Trust with this vision for Alistry Park, and I think it's going to be a great asset in the future. And I'd also like to take this opportunity of congratulating the City Council Parks Department for all their hard work. So I'm totally in favour of this vision. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rob Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. May I just ask the representative from the Wildlife Trust today a few questions around the scale and the scope of the proposal?
Yeah, I think if you want to ask any questions, it's primarily for asking the questions, Rob. So what are your questions?
Yeah,
please?
so the scale of the project and the proposal, could you give us an idea for the committee about the actual scale in a county perspective, a regional perspective, and across the country? How big a rewilding project is this in those contexts?
Okay, over to you, Joe, if you could...
Hi, I'm Jo Smith. I'm the Chief Exec of Derbyshire Wildlife Trust. It's lovely to meet you all, and thanks for your comments. It will be, if we rewild the whole park, it will be the largest urban rewilding project in the UK at the moment. Urban rewilding, that is. There's larger rural rewilding projects, but there is nothing on this scale in an urban setting.
Much for that. Claire, over to you. Just the finances, please. If you can just expand for Lucy, and then we'll bring it to a close. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So, just 3 key points just to wrap up, if I may, Chair. Meaningful consultation, absolutely. The vision for this park is there for the taking. Great contributions, I'm sure, will be made from key stakeholders and people of Derby, so we can shape this to meet need. We're pleased that there's lots of support from this committee this evening to help co-produce the new vision for the future. We'll start immediately, we'll use existing budgets, and we will then look to complement those with external funding which can support this.
Thank you, Claire. When you say support, I think it's tentative support. I think there are a few questions there about reassurances that I think members were seeking, Claire. And I'm sure you've made a note of those and you'll address those in the consultation process and the concerns that people have. Thank you, Claire. Okay, thank you very much for that. Moving on to item 11.
Chair.
Sorry, Lucy.
May I just test whether anybody else is concerned that we leave something of our history behind here? I have a recommendation to Cabinet to say that whatever is planned for Alistry Park, that the historic nature of the golf course is protected and not actively damaged by earth moving or other archaeology damaging activities. I can do, but if it's not got a seconder, then it's...
Can we define archaeological damaging activities? Could Councillor Kerr define archaeological damaging activities?
Because I am not an archaeologist, I am not an expert in knowing what sorts of things would cause archaeological damage. But I'm quite sure that digging big things into the ground would do damage. If you know, major earth moving with JCBs might do damage, but I'm not going to give a full list of it. But if something is proposed, they need to flag up and think, is that going to damage the archaeology? And if the answer is yes, don't do it.
Come back.
going off on a slight tangent, Chair, there is a slight irony here that I'm struggling to overlook. That
I'm struggling to hear, so can you bring your microphone up to your mouth, please?
Thank you. I'm struggling to overlook when we're talking about digging and JCBs. I mean, you yourself as a member of the Planning Committee have voted many times on housing developments, particularly like one recently in my ward, where, you know, there's no mention then of archaeological damaging activities. So to me, it just seems like you're just cherry-picking a phrase to stick into a recommendation.
Okay, Lucy, do you want to come back just to clarify?
Very often in planning recommendations, there is required to have an archaeological study being done before a building is constructed. If it's in an archaeological interest area, study is done before we allow further damage to be done to that area. In this instance, there isn't a requirement to construct a building, but there is the potential to do damage for other purposes. So I'm saying that we've got an archaeological landscape, which is a historic landscape, which is mentioned in the report. If we want to be able to maintain, give history to the future, we ought to be looking after our future history. And that means we should protect it at this point, and enable the design of whatever is going to be done here to be respectful of that history.
I'll come back to you. I just want to take some of the people indicated. Lucy, and then Mike, I think, indicated, and then I'll come back to you, Councillor.
I'd like some clarification, or maybe a suggesting of the wording of this recommendation, because I wonder if what Councillor Kerr, there are two things really. Alistry Park does have an incredible potential archaeological interest, because I think there were Roman potteries on the edge of the park that adjoins Burley Lane, but that's at the moment in the wild. These areas are already wild. It's a wildflower meadow, and it's got a wood round the edge that has been developed over the last 20 years. So once again, I reiterate my point that any development has to be proportionate to the fact that the park is already quite a sort of nature-friendly or very nature-friendly space. So, and then we have a house and a landscape created in the very early 19th century, 1801, I think. So where we do have landscaping in the 18th century style, which had a certain understanding of nature, which we don't actually conceptually follow at the moment. So you've got various levels of history in the park, and the golf course, was landscaped. I don't really know if what you really mean is the landscape, Lucy. That's really, obviously, because would you like to retain, because in terms of the golf course, protecting it, I mean, do you mean protecting the greens, which would be pointless, I think, if they're not being played on. So I suggest that you may mean more protecting the existing structure of the landscape than necessarily just any archaeological damage. Thanks.
Sorry, Chair. I was going to suggest perhaps we ask Joe to give some information on some of this to perhaps help the discussion for members.
Joe, do you want to come in? Joe, can you help us on that?
Well, I mean, I think probably the answer here is that we're going through a large consultation phase, and for me, it would be more sensible to come up with a more worked-up proposal and then think about these kind of issues at that particular stage, because at the moment we're just talking about a scoping proposal, really, and I think we're getting into a level of detail that we may not need to get into, or we may need to get into, but at this stage I would suggest, as an expert in this area, that we come back to this at a future stage.
That seems a sensible, positive way forward, Joe. I'm going to take Mike first of all, then Miles, and then Rob, and then you, Lucy. Okay, Mike, Miles, Rob, and then Lucy.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to, as a long-term member of the Planning Committee, reinforce what Lucy said about the fact that planning always is very is concerned that any development, the archaeological impact is always. I would have said that Lucy had shot my fox in what she said, but that's perhaps slightly the wrong phrase to use in this context. But planning is always very careful about archaeological issues. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I completely agree with what the, sorry, I forgot your name. Joe's just said. I think we are getting to the stage of preempting, pre-consultation, pre-plans, that are actually all to be decided, and we're getting into the detail of where diggers may potentially go, where something may or may not be built. Is it going to be near potential Roman artifacts or whatever it may be? So, for me at this stage, this is something that needs to just be put on the back burner.
I'm getting a number of nods from various quarters around the room on this, but Rob and then Lucy. Rob.
I'll be very brief. Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Miles, for bringing those really salient points. They're exactly the points I was going to make, and I do think that that Councillor Kerr is jumping the gun at this stage.
Thank you. I was really reflecting what's included in paragraph 4.3 on the report, which is that Historic England was looked at this with great seriousness and then decided not to designate. Now, as time passes, that assessment could be reconsidered as something that is of greater value in the future, looking back from a perspective of history. If we are going to design changes to the area, we need to be mindful of that before the outline designs and proposals are put together. Otherwise, it makes it much more difficult to amend those proposals. So if Jo and her team or our team is going away to look at this site, if they go away with a view that we respect Historic England's identification of this site as of having value, even if not sufficient value at the moment, then I think that is something that they could keep in mind, and I think we can encourage that by our recommendation.
Okay, I think Joe and others are nodding, and I think they've taken that on board, Lucy. Okay.
Chair, I think I had a seconder.
Sorry?
I think I'd had a seconder for my recommendation.
Yeah, you want to come in?
Sorry, just very briefly. It's just important to note on that point about the designation for Historic England, that was specific to a golf course layout, yet the actual park is a designated historic landscape in planning terms anyway. Anything that would be proposed by the Council, the Parks Department, the Derbyshire Wildlife Trust, just reiterating that this proposal is purely the generic rewilding principle. The in-depth detail would be scrutinised to the nth degree, purely because Allestree Park is so well loved. It's got such a rich history, both now, during it being a golf course, and previous to that. And it's got lots of historic features that we want to preserve, and rewilding could preserve that. I think someone mentioned one of the fields, one of the wildflower meadows at Burley Top, that is actually protecting a regionally important geological site. So rewilding does actually preserve a landscape as well. So I just wanted to make that point.
Thank you very much. On that basis, are you withdrawing your recommendation, Lucy? Is that correct?
I wasn't withdrawing my recommendation because, from what I've heard, there is no. There would be no conflict between my recommendation and what is being proposed.
So you still want to put your recommendation? Okay.
So I would like my recommendation to go forward, so it's there in black and white.
Okay, Stephen, read the recommendation and I'll put it to the vote. Do you want to read it, Lucy?
Yes. To recommend to Cabinet that whatever is planned for Allestree Park, that the historic nature of the golf course is protected and not actively damaged by earth moving or other archaeology damaging activities.
Okay, all those in favour of that recommendation, please show.
Six, 7 in favour, Chair, 7 in favour, Chair.
Okay, that motion is passed. Okay, right, thank you. Thank you, Claire. You're more than happy for you to stay here, but I'm sure you've got other things that you wish to do, and similarly other officers who need to leave. And thank you, Joe, for coming along. Really appreciate it. Please depart if that's what you wish to do. Thank you. Item 11. This is the Strategic School Place Planning Landau 40 College expansion proposal. Gamal, are you taking us through this? Thank you.
Great, thank you, Chair. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I'll draw out key points in the report, if that's okay. So, in the purpose section of the report, outlines the Council's overarching legal duty to ensure sufficient secondary school places. Over recent years, there's been a growth in primary numbers, which are now transitioning into secondary schools. Based on projections and modelling, the peak year of secondary year 7 intakes are going to be around 23-24. The Council has been working very closely with Landau Forte College around forward planning and looking at additional secondary school places. And 1.3 in the report outlines a proposal to consider expansion of Landau Forte Trust for an additional 104 pupils in their Year 7 group and 520 places in total over a number of years. Full details of the financial information are included in the Part 2 confidential report. 1.6 Chair outlines a capital scheme with a budget envelope of 11.9 million to create these additional places, and there are 4 principal elements to the scheme, consisting of remodelling the existing college site, purchasing of an additional site for a new block, purchasing of a second site and remodelling that, and a final point around remodelling some of the existing college space to create a new 15-place SEND unit for children with autism and social, emotional, mental health needs. Chair. The report sets out financial information. As I've outlined, Chair, growth in primary numbers, 4.2 outlines 18 primary expansions that have been done over the years, and these numbers now transitioning. And prior to Landau Forte, as part of planning for that secondary growth, additional secondary capacity was created at Benrose School, Derby Cathedral School, Derby Moor Academy, Murray Park and West Park in 2018-19, working closely with those schools. Appendices to the report set out the trend in numbers. 4.8 outlines further information on the capital scheme. And 4.16, Chair, is outlining the proposed governance arrangements. So the Council is working very closely with the Trust. The Trust will be taking forward the delivery of this project with their professional and technical advisors, and of course the Council will continue to work closely with the Trust during the process. Project management and delivery meetings will be established jointly as part of governance arrangements in relation to this project. Chair, if I pause there, happy to take any questions.
Yeah, I would. I've got some observations. Only this afternoon in a roadshow that we had down Chester Green, there were a number of people who came concerned about the existing parking and traffic problems and dangers on the junction of City Road and Mansfield Road, because we currently have 2 schools within a matter of yards. St Mary's temporarily housed next to Landau Forte. We've got Landau Forte, which serves the whole of the city, so many parents are bringing their children to and from with their cars. And there can be chaos at times around that junction, with limited enforcement due to the lack of time for City Council and police to do that properly. We need to be talking to the school about travel plans, but those travel plans can be ignored. But we have a real issue there. St Mary's, I'm not sure what the time scale is for it continuing to be there, but from September 2022, we're going to have a considerable increase in Landau 40, adding to that problem. We need to be mindful of that and be coming up with solutions to the issues that myself as a councillor, Councillor Alison Martin, and more importantly, the people living and using that area have, so that they need to be addressed. Thank you. Alison, over to you.
I agree, and I can leave it to that. I'm not going to elaborate on why I agree, Councillor Repton, because we've said we won't do that. But I do agree. I have spoken to Gomel at some length about this. I'm very grateful to him for giving me his time to discuss this, because with my other roles, I wanted to look at this development not only for its impact on Chester Green, but in relation to the secondary ed development across the city generally. And I can see that there may be some benefits which are going to be perhaps more discussed under the confidential papers to the area. But I am also concerned about the scale of this development. You know, increasing the school by 1/3, that's a lot. Now, I know that normally, there's 2 points here. The report says, when it talks about the impact on climate, I think it's just referring to the building itself. But actually, we know that travel to school, and, you know, parents taking their children to and from school, or carers, uses a lot of cars. I mean, that's just the culture we have. So I think that's a climate concern, but it's also a concern with respect to the impact on Chester Green. And I'll remind, Gurmal knows this and everyone knows this, that because of the nature of the way the trust is set up at Landau 40, very few of those children who live in Chester Green, or even most of Darley Ward, will be able to go to that, attend that school. So you're going to have very few people actually walking to school because of the nature of the place of the school. So I actually have a recommendation around this. So I don't know if I should suggest my recommendation now, or whether you want to take other comments beforehand.
Happy for you to make the recommendation now, Alison.
Okay, I've just written it now, so it's maybe, you know, hopefully it'll be okay. But I put, for reasons of climate change and local traffic management, Exec Scrutiny recommends that prior to proceeding with the scheme, a detailed travel plan is undertaken by the Trust and the Council to ensure that travel to the school will be predominantly travel to the school, will be predominantly by public transport.
Thank you, Alison. Stephen's penning that now. I'll take Lucy's contribution, and then if there's no other contributions, we'll perhaps move to the vote on that, because it does seem a positive, non-party political way forward to deal with a problem that I think is obvious is there for us all to try and deal with. Lucy.
Thank you, Chair. My thoughts have been going in a similar direction, I think, regarding climate change. I don't think we can have any say over the carbon efficiency of the buildings and what is being done there, because I think that will be in the trusts or the academies' say and not ours. But I am concerned about the planning for this. There's in the appendix, it shows the expected number of pupils in the coming years, but that only goes forward about, I think, 7 years. Whereas we could, for children who are already born, they will become Year 7 children in 10 years' time. So we should have 10 years of data available within Derby for the number of children in a particular age group, and we don't see all that. So the trend that's there in the appendix shows how the numbers are beginning to dip down. And that would mean that we're looking in a few years' time to actually reduce our capacity, our secondary school capacity. So that's my first question. I don't think that we have enough data. I don't think Cabinet have enough data here on which to make a decision. That will be the correct sustainable decision if we're then going to have falling numbers within less than 10 years. Because that may mean we're then trying to decommission schools, which puts a whole other stress onto the educational system. The second point I wanted to raise was the the location of this school, which, as has been stated and as we know, is that it gathers children from across the whole city. A local school, we encourage pupils to be coming on foot. Many do walk. In this location, many more are likely to be coming by bus. I think they're mostly using service buses, but I don't know if that's entirely the case. But it seems to me that the average carbon footprint for school travel will be higher for a central school with a very wide catchment area than it would for a local school. And therefore, I think we need to ensure that there isn't a better solution, which could be to have one additional class form going up the school. So initially one additional form, 2, 3, 4 over the years, but put that across different schools within our secondary sector. And that might be a more a lower carbon footprint solution and also be better for the long-term viability of those schools. So I also have a recommendation, Chair, which covers those 2 points.
You've got a recommendation, do you say, Lucy?
For those, that covers those 2 points, Chair. Yes.
Okay, I'm going to take Gmail, and if you can send that to Stephen now, please, so we're not delayed. Gmail, can you address the points that Lucy's made about there not being enough data to proceed, and rather than have this school sort of expand other schools elsewhere, I think would be suggested. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll respond briefly. Just in terms of forecasting primary secondary numbers, CYP Scrutiny have a report going to consider this in December, so further information is available and will be provided. And Chair, to confirm that as the secondary numbers are beginning to fall, or will fall eventually, but primary numbers are falling at the moment, it's always a difficulty around one, kind of expanding existing schools, which is what this is doing, which allows the flex to expand and contract, rather than, which isn't the need in this case, building new schools, which are then more difficult to close in that sense. So in terms of forward planning over 10-year period or beyond, you're looking at a way of being able to flex on expand and contract, balanced against building new schools. So that's always a challenge around that. And in terms of briefly on class organisations and forms of entry, it is more difficult for secondary schools and other schools to be delivering the full range of curriculum by trying to have additional classrooms or extra smaller numbers across a range of secondary schools. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Gamal. Right, we have 2 recommendations. Before we go to the vote on those, I'll take Rob and then I'll take Alan. Rob.
Thank you, Chair. Just seeing as Councillor Kerr is putting forward another recommendation, could I just ask for some clarity for him? Are you wanting the proposed enlargement of this school ceased until you see the 10-year data that Gamal said is available? Are you wanting to pause this project?
Lucy, do you want to come back just to clarify?
I'm suggesting that Cabinet ought to see additional data, and if it's available for CYP next month, it's presumably available now, and it's a pity it isn't in the report. Cabinet are the people to make this decision, and I don't think that this report actually talks about all the options that are available. Gamal has just explained that it's harder to plan expansion of a number of schools, and I guess it's because you need one science lab is needed. But I really am not convinced by that argument. I would need to see more of it, and I think that should have been written into the report. So I'm not saying the answer is wrong. I'm just saying that I haven't got enough information to say that the answer that's been put forward is correct.
Lucy's not convinced at this stage.
Just to clarify, because I don't think you answered my question, and for the clarity, are you wanting this to be paused until you see the data that you want to see? Is that what recommendation you put forward? That's how it seems to me.
Well, the recommendation that Stephen's about to read out, it says that Cabinet ask for further information before making a decision on this expansion.
Okay, Alan.
Thank you, Chair. As Darley Ward councillor, I think it's extremely important that local residents' concerns are taken into account. Chester Green is a very select area within the city, and I just feel that a travel plan is extremely important as we move ahead with this project. Thank you.
Right, Stephen, can you take us through Councillor Martin's recommendation, and then we'll vote on it, and then Councillor Kerr's recommendation, and we'll vote for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So first of all, Councillor Martin's recommendation, that's been seconded by the Chair. And that reads, for the reasons of climate change and local traffic management, the Executive Scrutiny Board recommends to Council Cabinet that prior to proceeding with the scheme, a detailed travel plan is undertaken by the Trust and the Council to ensure that travel to the school will be predominantly by public transport.
That's unanimous, Stephen. If you could take us through Councillor Kerr's recommendations. Thank you.
So there's two parts to it. Do we have a second?
Yes, Councillor
Sorry, I hadn't
Carr.
read it out yet.
Well, you're welcome to do so now, Councillor Kerr.
Lucy, please read it through. Within 3 minutes. Thank you.
The Cabinet asked for further information before making a decision on this expansion. This to include 1. The carbon footprint of school travel for pupils to Landau Forte compared to other schools in the city, and 2. The longer term estimates of future pupil numbers for another 3 years. That should be, I guess, beyond what's included in the report, to help anticipate if the trend of falling pupil numbers is likely to continue, in which case required school capacity may then fall, and to use this further information to explore whether it would be better to expand a greater number of existing secondary schools by an additional year group rather than put this much expansion into one school.
Okay, you've heard the recommendations, them is seconded. Lucy basically asking Cabinet to consider these aspects. We've moved to the recommendation, Miles. You know, I did... very quickly, I'll give you 30 seconds. Go on.
Just on that last point about expanding other schools, other school places, is that to replace the proposed expansion of this school?
That is what Cabinet would need to consider.
Is that what you're asking in your recommendation,
Yeah.
though? It's your recommendation.
To whether it would be better to expand a greater number of existing secondary schools by an additional year group rather than put this much expansion into one school.
Asking them to consider that. Okay. Those in favour of the recommendation, please show.
7 in favour, Chair. Okay. None against.
Thank you very much on that. Thank you, everybody. Gamal, if you wish to depart, we understand. Thank you very much, but more than welcome to stay if you wish to do.
Chair, just to confirm, I'll stay for part 2 report. Thank you.
Sure, of course, yeah. Okay, moving on to item 12, Padley Centre relocation. Rachel, are you taking us through this, please?
I think Ian and Catherine are going to do that for you, Chairman.
Sorry?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks.
I'll start off, but Catherine Williams, right over the far side there, is here to help us as well. Members will be well aware that it's necessary in order to complete the Beckett-Well performance venue to acquire the Padley land holdings on Beckett Street, and that as we are helping Padley to relocate, we are working with them to ensure that their new model of operation entirely accords with the Council's homelessness strategy, and that they're fully aligned with other agencies within the city. On the 20th of July, Cabinet approved in principle for Council to acquire the Padley assets on Beckett Street, and then on the 23rd, on March 2021, Cabinet approved a grant and a loan to Padley to enable them to make the necessary move, and also a funding budget for the council to acquire the Padley premises off them and off the other partner involved in owning those premises. as we've developed that over the months of this year, it's become clear that the costs that we had originally attributed to the Padley move were a little on the low side and need to be increased, and that's largely arising because of the detailed survey work that Padley have commissioned in relation to the property that they're looking to acquire, and obviously we've got a better understanding of timescales that we can actually acquire that building, and also we've got a better understanding of the detailed costs that those works are going to cost us, particularly in view of the timescale that we're now working towards. To cover those additional costs, Cabinet is going to be asked to increase the capital grant that it's previously approved to Cabinet. It will also involve converting a previous loan that had been approved to Padley into part of that additional grant ask as well. In exchange for that, Padley will agree to the sale of their premises within the timescales that we require, and they have agreed to move within the timescales that we require, although those decisions have got to be formally ratified by the Padley board in the next week or so. It's become clear that the property that Padley hope to move towards, given the amount of works that are required, won't be available by early February when we do require Padley to vacate, and therefore it is clear that we are going to need to work with Padley to find a temporary location, and there may be some additional costs associated with this, but the funding package that is being put before members tomorrow will cover all of those costs and give an absolute cap to those. Thank you, Chair. I think that's all I need to say as introduction.
Thank you, Ian. Before I take other questions or observations from members, I'd like to say, according to the documents in front of us this evening, the Padley Centre is to receive over £1 million to secure its future elsewhere in the city, whilst the Debrec Studios community facility has been thrown into serious doubt because of the lack of a plan as well to save this much loved, valued and used facility. Debrec Studios is a music venue, community facility and studio, as well as home for many Derby musicians and artists, as well as many national and international artists. In addition to a recording studio music venue, it has a cafe and a workshop with over 2,000 people a year attending gigs there and nearly 2,000 people attending the workshop. In addition, nearly 300 artists are using the various facilities each and every week. When Jay Dean moved to the premises previously owned by Eurodollar, they were in a dreadfully bad state. Using his own money, his own hard work combined with volunteer action, he has been able to successfully renovate and convert the premises to a successful popular music venue and community facility. If Derby is in its bid to become the national city of culture, we need to demonstrate that we value and actively support all forms of cultural activity and show that we're prepared to support and nurture organisations like Debrec Studios. These proposals, as they stand, will see that they're being made homeless. This simply cannot be allowed to happen, and the first thing we need to do is to positively engage with them to help them find suitable premises. Alongside this, we should apply for Government Additional Restrictions Grant, ARG, to help finance such a move to the new premises in the city. And I therefore propose the following recommendation. Executive Scrutiny Committee recommends that Cabinet ensures that immediate help and support is given to Debrec Studio to help it successfully relocate and survive so that it can continue to play an important role in the cultural life of this city. Such help should include the possibility of applying for an additional restrictions grant, ARG, and any other possible grants or financial support. I'll take other contributions, then I'll move back to that recommendation shortly. Miles, first of all, please, and then Alison.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the speech you've just given regarding the studio, this agenda item is relating to the Padley Group. So, whilst I appreciate that obviously neighbouring buildings, I think that's correct. You're putting forward a recommendation relating to something that isn't part of this agenda item. I don't know if I get clarity on that.
Well, I think, if I might say, before we bring the legal view on this, it is connected, because £1 million, if we decide on this evening, Cabinet decide tomorrow night, over £1 million will be helping Padley relocate. And as part of us making this decision tonight, this organisation, which I've said gives immense input to the city's cultural life, will be thrown to the wolves and is likely to fold. That's why it's important we make it. But I'm more than happy for you to make a comment, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm inclined to agree with Councillor Patterson. This report is very specific about the Padley Group and the specific elements relating to its funding. It's hard to see what the direct link is in other than geographic in respect of other interests.
Well, I will disagree as an elected member of this authority, and I think it's our right, if we so wish, to consider this recommendation and vote on it, because this organisation will fold as a result. Councillor Martin.
Obviously, I agree with what you have said in your piece, Councillor Repton. Obviously, I can't rule whether this particular recommendation is valid or not, but I also share, I'd like to talk about the Padley Centre shortly, because we were all concerned about that, but I also have concerns about the Debrec studios, as you've indicated, and I do have a recommendation that does actually relate to, regarding Debrec, that relates to the content of this report. So I'm happy to put that now. I mean, the specific recommendation is in the confidential area of the report, where it talks about contingency capital, but my recommendation doesn't actually refer to that amount or any of those details. So I'm happy to give it now or to wait till later, because I believe that it does relate to this report, because it relates to the contingency capital mentioned in this report. Thank you.
I think we probably, just to be sure, we may take that in the confidential section, Alison. Okay. Rob Cooper, first of all, and Miles Patterson.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to the legal counsel we've been provided, I have concern because of the legal advice about the very specific nature of this report and this agenda item, that could potentially bring a precedent in the future where, you know, we could be talking about, you know, a myriad of different things in an agenda item, and things are being brought in that have nothing to do with that agenda item, taking us off topic. Could the legal counsel just advise whether she has similar concerns about precedent, setting a precedent in these sorts of environments, but also as well, you know, what advice would she give to the chair, whether it's actually a valid recommendation, and would she advise to go ahead with it?
It's obvious that there's certain people in this chamber this evening don't want to discuss these issues and are trying to close down debate. It's up to elected members to decide, having heard the officer's expert advice, but it's up to elected members to make a decision, and that's what we're elected to actually do. Rachel.
Yeah, I don't want to get into this debate. I mean, I think clearly it is important that the reports that are presented to members containing particular items, that is the subject matter for the discussion. So there is a valid concern about straying off the report actually in front of you and to raise recommendations that relate to it directly. So I would completely concur with Emily's advice on that. But just for members' information around and comfort really in terms of the concern around the Dubrec studio, I can confirm that officers are working with the owner of the Dubrec studio to look at opportunities and options around external funding and other funding to try and maintain that provision. So there is active work going on in trying to deal with that. And I can give that comfort to members if that helps, Chairman.
I think that's really helpful. Rachel, the Assistant CEO, has said there is a connection. There's a definite connection. That's why they're having that debate. So on that basis, I'd like to put this recommendation to the vote, because at this stage we are asking the Cabinet to at least consider these points to make sure that it's flagged up and dealt with in a serious way. I'll take Lucy first of all. Lucy.
I just would like some more information as to why Dubrec are at risk, because they're not. I don't know exactly where they are.
They are going to be made homeless.
But it isn't the whole of Beckett Street that is going to be lost.
They are going to lose their premises, Lucy.
Chair, Catherine Williams has indicated, I think, on that point.
Sorry, I'm in the corner here, Chair.
Yeah, sure.
I just thought it might be helpful to answer Councillor Kerr's question.
Sure.
The particular property involved is within the footprint of the Beckett Well performance venue. Therefore, there are negotiations for acquiring that property.
Yeah.
It's not the whole of Beckett Street.
Right. Well, with that, I'm going to put this recommendation to the vote now. You've heard the recommendation. Those in favour, please indicate. Go on, Stephen, do you want to go through it, please?
Chair, thank you, Chair. First of all, just going to check whether you have a seconder for that, please.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Okay, thank you. All those in favour, please.
Sure. Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 6.
Yep.
6 in favour. All those against, please.
2.
2 against, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other issues with regard to this? Are you quite happy, Rob?
Yeah, I'd just like to raise a bit of a concern. You know, I just watched your exchange with one of the officers, and the officer gave her view. Then you seemingly put words in her mouth, and I watched the facial expression of the officer in that I'm thinking about. I just want you to be aware that don't do those sorts of things to officers. It's not very fair. You know that I can defend myself in these environments, and I'm not saying that the officers can't, but you know I thought it was pretty low, and I'd like you to consider withdrawing what you said about what you thought the officer said previously. And if you want me to raise who it is, I'm more than happy to.
Well, I don't see it that way at all. I think questions were asked, answers were given, and they're interpreted the way they are by individuals. That's part of the rough and tumble and about the forms of democracy. If you have a problem with the truth getting out there, Rob, and things debating things, that's one thing. But to try and dress that up about somehow that you're offended by democracy, then that's another, which I'll have no truck with. Okay, moving.
Were you going to ask anything about the Padley Centre? Are you going to actually talk about the Padley Centre? Or are you going to actually talk about the Padley Centre itself? Or was it just about students? Sorry, and then...
you want to talk about the Padley Centre itself?
No, I'm asking if you are, yeah, that's the item on the agenda.
If you want to go.
Councillor Martin, that was the agenda item, was the Padley Centre.
Yeah, okay, Anderson, yeah, sure.
Thank you, and thank you for that. And thank you, Ian, for this report on the Padley Centre. And it is worth emphasising that whilst we, as a committee, have just supported a recommendation with regard to the Dubrec Studios, I suspect there isn't one councillor in this room who doesn't also care deeply about the fate of the Padley Centre and the work it does. So we know how important it is, especially at the moment. So I am very concerned, though, Ian, about how we've come to this point of needing this level of new funding, which we haven't referred to yet. But, you know, clearly a building was identified, and yet suddenly having committed to purchasing this property, we now find that it needs extensive renovation, which hadn't been apparently anticipated in the purchasing. And it seems to me that that's incredibly poor management, and I don't know who is responsible for that. But I don't think, given the volume, and I won't refer to the sums because they're in the confidential item, but given the sums involved, it seems to me that that is, the council shouldn't just give away the money and then give away more money. You know, I don't know why we're doing that, and I'd like you to explain a little bit why we're doing that, and why we're pressing ahead with this when actually, given that they've got to move to temporary accommodation anyway, it would make sense to halt the process, not add more money as a matter of course, and because we all want value for money for the Padley Centre and its wider work as well, and actually just review the entire situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Ian, do you want to respond?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and Catherine may add to it. What I would say, Chair, is that we have been on a search for a suitable property for at least 18 months. It's been really challenging, it's been difficult, and that's just not council and council officers. We have employed well-established local commercial agents to help us in that search as well, and they have worked very, very hard in terms of that search. And Padley have worked hard in terms of that search as well, and they have been going out themselves, looking at properties, driving around the city. And this is the only property that has come forward that meets their needs. We've looked in detail at a lot of other properties, but they haven't proved to be suitable. So that's the first point. It has been a long, arduous search of the city to find this property. What I would say in terms of the costs escalating, it can, I think, be compared to all of us when we buy a house. You do an initial survey, and those inspections were completed by professionals acting on behalf of Padley at the time when we were having to make some of those decisions earlier in the year. But as is the way when you start looking more closely with a domestic property, as you investigate further, more issues become apparent, and that's certainly the case here, as Padley have employed professionals to go in and do detailed surveys of the property. Then more problems and more issues that need addressing have come to light. Another issue, of course, is we all know that the building trade is really hot at the moment. You know, you will have all heard on the news that build prices are increasing markedly, and of course, the longer this project takes, the more that the industry build costs go up as well. So, and of course, we've got to be mindful that we're not doing the works exactly here and now. We will be completing those works in months to come. So we have to factor those elements in as well. And I suppose the last thing I'd say before I hand over to Catherine is this is absolutely, if I can put it, the worst case scenario, that it's a cap on the possible costs that the council could incur. Part of this agreement is that our officers will work with Padley as the building the designs are finalised and taken forward to try and reduce those costs wherever possible. And we will be looking, and Catherine's team will be looking to see if there are any other external funding sources that could contribute to these costs as well. So I think, Chair, that's what I'd say, but I don't know if Catherine's got anything to add.
Thank you, Ian. Catherine, anything to add before I bring Alison back?
Only very quickly, Ian's covered all of the points I would. It was mainly a point on the last area around the delivery of the works, and Ian's absolutely right. This is a grant agreement. The acquisition and the works themselves are the responsibility of the Padley Centre. The council is providing a grant. We need to make sure that that grant is drawn down accurately and wisely and provides good value for money. So there will be tender processes that we will support the Padley Group with to make sure that the costs are value for money, and then we'll be monitoring exercises that we'll support them with to make sure that they're drawn down appropriately. So that's all I wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Alison, I'll bring you back, and then Lucy.
Thank you. I do have a recommendation on this. So perhaps if I just say a few words, make my recommendation, and then Lucy can come in. Is that all right? I do actually. Nothing you said, Ian, unfortunately, has reassured me about this at all. I mean, I don't know what surveyors you use when you buy a house, but the idea that we're comparing, you know, a community development of this importance to, you know, Joe Bloggs buying a terraced house and not having a very rigorous surveyor is really very poor. I mean, this needs to be done far more professionally. The idea that somehow or other we're just throwing a sort of a maximum cap at this and hoping they come in lower suggests again that it's not been thought through, it's not very rigorous. This is taxpayers' money we're talking about, and as we all know, we're all the same. Everybody in this room would be the same. If you know you've got a certain amount of money to spend, you're likely to spend that budget on a development. I mean, it's just fairly natural. So I don't think there's any real incentive here to keep the costs down. But I think this isn't an attitude of saying, look, you know, being miserly towards the Padley Centre. It's saying, look, this whole situation has been badly managed. It's not convincing. There isn't a rigorous plan in place. There have been errors in estimating costs, and the fact that it's just being given to the Padley Centre to do what they will, I don't think that's very convincing either. And the fact that they're now having to move to a temporary location suggests to me that this is actually an opportunity to review the situation, to just halt this and look at it again. So my recommendation, shall I give this now? Executive Scrutiny are concerned that the costs are already escalating for relocating Padley, primarily due to the new location being potentially overpriced and the building being in a very poor state. So to ensure that taxpayers' money is not wasted, and the fact that a temporary move is needed, Exec Scrutiny recommends a review of the permanent location should be undertaken prior to proceeding with the purchase.
Have you got that written down? Something to stick with us?
I can write it. I can do that. Thank you.
Thank you. And my first question I'd noted down was could the temporary location become the permanent one? And it very much reflects what Councillor Martin's just said, I think. I was also concerned in paragraph 9.1 where it talks about improvements and upgraded in terms of the climate implications. And I have no idea whether those two words mean that the building would then be zero carbon ready. But if not, we ought to be expecting that building to be zero carbon ready as part of those improvements and upgrading. The other question I have is I acknowledge that the original properties were one in our ownership and leased to Padley, and the other in Padley's ownership, freehold ownership. What is the expected status of either the temporary location, which may or may not have been identified, or the proposed permanent one in terms of the ownership of that property, the freehold ownership? Would that freehold ownership be left with Padley, or would the freehold ownership be with the council?
Okay. Are you going to answer these in, or what about Catherine?
I'll go first, Chair, if that's okay. So in relation to that last point, in terms of the temporary location, the freehold of the temporary building would continue to be held by the council, and then once Padley vacate that temporary building, then that building would be available to the council to use as it sees fit at that time, Chair. In relation to the earlier points, Chair, I think perhaps my analogy with a domestic acquisition wasn't particularly helpful then in this context. But I think the point I would make, I'm not sure, Chair, I'd agree that it's errors. The point I was trying to get a point was, as with the nature of any significant refurbishment, as this is, the more detailed surveys that you conduct, and they are being conducted by professional people, it is almost quite likely that you will uncover additional works that need to be done, Chair. That was really the point I was making. More detailed surveys have revealed more costs, and I'm looking across to see if Catherine wants to add anything, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Catherine, do you want anything to add to that?
Only that, I think, Lucy, your question was about the permanent relocation opportunity, and just to confirm that the freehold for that would be the Padley Group owning that property. I think it's clear in the reports that, as I said previously, the financial detail, obviously in the confidential report, pertains to a grant from the council, not the council's acquisition of the new property for the Padley Centre.
And Chair, can I just ask...
Thank you, Catherine. Do you want to come back, Lucy?
Yeah, I'd just like to ask about these improvements and upgraded, and whether the building, after all this work has been done on it, will be zero carbon ready.
Catherine or Ian? Catherine, I think Ian's looking at you saying, please answer this one.
I'm not sure I can answer that definitively, Councillor Kerr. Obviously, what we're looking to do is make sure that we can support as many improvements as possible on the sustainability agenda, but I can't answer whether it's zero carbon or not.
Stephen, would you like to read it, please?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just waiting for this to come through. I can confirm it is here, Chair. Thank you. Right. Executive Scrutiny Board are concerned that the costs of the Padley relocation are already escalating, primarily due to the new location being potentially overpriced and the property being in a very poor state. To ensure that taxpayers' money is not wasted, permanent relocation should be reviewed prior to proceeding with the purchase, which is facilitated by the need to move to a temporary location.
Okay, those in favour, I will second that. Do we have a seconder for the recommendation? I'll second it. Those in favour of the recommendation, can you please show? Those against, please show.
5 in favour, 0 against.
Thank you very much for that, and thank you, Miles, for drawing our attention to the fact that we needed to debate that. I think Alison's very pleased with that. Thank you. Sorry? Sorry, Lucy, yeah. Lucy, you got your...
I'm just doing a recommendation, Chair, regarding the climate readiness of the building. I've assumed that would have been included, but I'm just working on that fast.
Whilst Lucy's doing that, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Just like to thank my colleague, Councillor Patterson, for trying to steer the ship on this agenda item and allowing Councillor Martin to have her say, ironically by a person that alleges me to be anti-democratic when he's shutting down one of our colleagues on this committee. But I would also like to point out some of my colleagues...
I wouldn't dare shut down Councillor Martin.
So you're shutting me down. So down to the right, I'd like to just point out that this is what happens when groups play party political games with a coalition of chaos. You get suboptimal chairmanship of a committee. So I'd like to go to my question. Ian, at 7.8, it says that there's going to be minor revenue costs when this all goes through. Could you just explain what the minor cost would be in a ballpark figure for us to understand what a minor cost would be? And it's on page 5, sorry. And what would that be paying for?
Ian? Yeah.
It's There is nothing in my mind here and now, genuinely, that I can foresee that will go in there. However, just having experience of this sort of thing, sometimes small costs can come out of the woodwork that nobody has seen, and I think we're talking literally a few £100 here and there, but because we've been quite specific in the report with the figures, we obviously just wanted to put that in there, that if we were talking of something of that order, that it could be picked up within our existing budget, so there would be no additional call on other budgets, Chair.
Thank you. And I can't let Councillor Cooper's comments go by when we have a party that runs this council with dither, delay and indecision. And we have the Conservative Party now queuing up to stab each other in the back with internecine warfare. So any chaos that there is, Rob, I think you need to get your own house in order first of all. But myself and Councillor Martin have an excellent working relationship. I wouldn't dare try and shut Councillor Martin up, nor would I ever wish to do so. Councillor Kerr, on to your recommendation, please, and then we'll move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to get back to business. My recommendation reads to recommend to Cabinet that if the purchase for the permanent building goes ahead, the Council asks Padley Group to do its best to ensure that the planned improvement work includes sufficient changes to enable the building to be zero carbon ready.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Carr, thank you. Stephen, are you okay to read that out to the committee, and then we'll vote on it? Thank you.
Well, that's if you require me to read it again. Just waiting for it to come through. Here we go. To recommend to Council Cabinet that if the purchase for the permanent building goes ahead, the Council asks Padley Group to do its best to ensure that the planned improvement work includes sufficient changes to enable the building to be zero carbon ready.
Okay, all those in favour, please show. Those against?
4 in favour, 2 against.
Okay, that one's passed. Thank you very much. I can thank officers. If Ian and yourself, Catherine, wish to stay, I'm delighted to have you, but I'm sure you have other things to actually do. Thank you. Okay, moving on. Item 13, I believe it now is. The draft 2021-22 Q2 financial monitoring. Who's taking us through that?
That's me, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. This is Q2 financial monitoring. So this is the financial position of the Council to the period to the end of September 21, forecasted to the end of the financial year. In terms of the revenue budget, 1.3 of the report gives the Directorate summary of the financial forecast. Gross pressures forecast to the end of the year are 1.8 million. What I mean by gross pressures is that's before applying any budgets that were put aside for our COVID scoring. They were predominantly income shortfalls in leisure and parking services as we regain post-pandemic activity. Netting the gross position off by the COVID reserves and some other small in-year reductions see our net position is a £5.4 million overspend, which is a positive movement from the Q1 position when we were reporting circa £6.4 million. In terms of sustaining that position and making some headway into the overspend as we moved into the second quarter of the financial year, we were quick to react to the emerging pressures and quickly set up processes to ensure that critical essential expenditure only was being incurred, and this has contributed to the favourable position we're reporting this quarter. Those measures will continue for the remainder of the financial year. The cause of our overspends are reflective of those that were reported in Q1. The single biggest ones within that are pay pressures at 2.1 million and demand for our services. We can see that the biggest drive for demand for our services are continue to be in children's social care, where we're seeing an increase of 26% increase on previous year activity, and that's in terms of contact.
And whilst our looked after children population is holding, the insufficient number of places nationally to place children is causing a huge spike in costs. However, on a positive side, in terms of the city centre recovery and leisure recovery, we're currently forecasting a shortfall of around 8% of our normal income generated in that area. So that is a really good position to be in at Q2. And we hope that that improvement will continue for the remainder of the financial year. However, I must state that what we do know, though, is that the latter 2 quarters of the financial year will continue to be a challenge for the council, especially as we move into the winter months and the impact that that has on our care services. In terms of delivery of planned savings, it's positive to report that the deliverability of our planned savings for this year is at 87%. We are proposing to deliver 8.3 million against a planned £9.6 million. Appendix 1 of the report provides the detail of the forecast revenue variances in quite big detail, and Appendix 2 of the report details our reserves position. In terms of the capital monitoring, our total slippage, as we reported, significant slippage in Q1 is 93 million against approved programme of 274 million. We'd already reported 72 million at our Q1 position, so we're reporting on an additional 17 million in this report. The variance of all those capital programme adjustments and movements are detailed within Appendix 4 of the report. The dedicated scores grant is contained within the report, and that continues to show significant pressures, particularly on the high needs block, which supports children with additional needs across the city. There is a very high risk that the DSG reserve will be depleted by the end of the financial year. That is a national problem. I think it's been well rehearsed nationally around the impact that the high needs has had since the reforms a few years ago. To ensure that we are in a sustainable position for the future, it's important that a transformation programme is carried out, and details of that transformation programme is included within item 14 of the agenda. Finally, the collection fund and council tax and non-domestic rates activity continue to be challenging in terms of our recovery. Recovery activities have now commenced and returned to business as usual and pre-pandemic levels. And that provides a summary of our Q2 position. Thank you.
Thank you for the report. I think it shows both what a very fragile position we are in, but also how much hard work that officers in lots of different places in the council have been putting in over the last few months. It's clearly a challenging situation, but marginally better than it was. So I think the first thing, if we wish to, Chair, we might do would be to send our appreciation to officers across the council. And if people are happy to minute that, I think that would be good coming from us. I have 3 points that I wanted to raise, though, specifically. In 4.1.17, there's a comment about waste tonnages and recycling and reuse. Well, that's what I think there ought to be. We're talking there about waste tonnages. But unless we are engaging with the public, they won't know that this is an issue that they can do something about. And this is also my theme generally, in that we are here on behalf of the people of Derby. Our role is to provide them with a service. It's not as though they have any options on this. We are the service provider because of local government and the way it works. But they are also part of that. And I don't think that people feel as much as though they have a stake in the city council as maybe they should do. And I think one way to build up that feeling that they have a say and they can influence things is actually to ask them more often to get involved and not to be afraid of actually asking the public for help. And yes, in terms of the recycling, it is something that we can clearly do. And I think that people are open to that because it's something that they understand and they can engage in. But it isn't just there. The other big thing we need to be more in your face about asking for is foster carers and support for the children who are being looked after at the moment. We have adverts on lampposts. We have statements going out with council tax bills. We have social media mentioning it, but none of this is quite sufficiently personal enough for people to think that that need of a child to be looked after or a sibling group to be looked after actually applies to them and what they could be doing. Sadly, I think this is something that some of the independent providers are a lot better at doing, and it's something we need to continue to work at because we're not there yet. And that also goes for the staff that we need. No, are we saying to people that care staff are needed, that we need to have a children's home manager? We are going out to agencies to ask this, but we're not asking this of the people of Derby. And there may well be people in Derby who could step into those roles. They may have retired early from something else, they might have the right skills, and they may be willing to come back and do those sorts of roles for the city as public service. And I think we need to have that sort of attitude to be able to solve the financial problem that we are in at the moment. And finally, I just want to comment on 4.1.33, which is talking about mitigation plans and the need for increasing footfall and vibrancy within the city centre. And yes, wouldn't that be lovely? But we also know that the role of city centres is changing. And I just wonder when we decide that actually maybe we should put some of those effort into something else and stop flogging what is at the moment a dead horse. Perhaps we ought to be saying, how can we make sure that our district centres are as vibrant as they could be, and make sure that the district centres are working. And that will keep our communities active, and it will actually reduce the footfall of people coming into the city centre for doing shopping that they should be doing locally.
Thank you, Lucy. I'll just make a comment about 4.133. I have a lot of sympathy with all that you said until you talked about the city centre. We see our city centres up and down this country dying with an acceleration to online shopping, out-of-town shopping, and they need to be rescued. And I think this comment was made at the last cabinet meeting, and I've written to the relevant government minister, and I'm still waiting a response, because this needs to be taken very seriously by government, because unless we address the many problems that there are in terms of reviving the city centres, like rents, business rates, and other such problems, they will continue to decline, and we simply cannot allow that to happen, where towns and cities become almost ghost towns. So they continue to be my concern and my group's concerns. Before I bring you back, Lucy, any other contributions? I don't see any. Yeah, Lucy, I'll bring you back in.
Just on that point, Chair, because I completely agree with you. At the moment, we're not going to be able to get the changes because we haven't got the right structure to enable it to happen. But there's no point until we get those changes from national government to go on flogging the dead horse. Let's go and flog something that we can get moving.
That's why I said I agreed with you. About 90%, thank you. Okay, any further contributions? If not, thank you very much, Alison. And if you wish to leave, or you may have to stay for other ones, possibly. I'm not sure, but I'll leave that to your discretion. Item 14, compliance with contract and financial procedures rules. Is that yourself, Alison? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
You're earning your money tonight.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, right, compliance with contract and financial procedure rules. There's a number of items within this report. The first one is in relation to the Opportunity Area Programme, and the Derby Opportunity Area Programme has been funded by the Department for Education since 2016, and it's focused in Derby's most deprived areas. The DfE have expanded the programme for a further 12 months with a new focus of making up for lost time during the pandemic. The DfE, Department for Education, will ask Derby City Council to receive a grant of up to 1.369 million for the Derby area during 21-22 financial years, and we will award that in line with the recommendations from the Local Opportunity Areas Board and the DfE. So there's a recommendation in the report to approve the acceptance of the Opportunity Area Grant for Derby for 1.3669 million. The second item within the report is around the ageing well bid of £780,000. The council has bid for and secured £780,000 from the Ageing Well Programme Board, which is hosted by Derby and Derby Clinical Commissioning Group, the CCG, for an Ageing Well programme, and that's funding to provide social care element of the NHS's urgent community response in Derby. And this is to fund the proposed rapid integration independence at home team, and the team will deliver step up to front door activity, and will be working alongside our current re-enablement and occupational therapy within the CareLink service. It's recommended in the report to note a bid to the Ageing Well Board of the 780,000. There's also a recommendation to delegate the authority to the Strategic Director of Corporate Resources to accept the terms of the Ageing Well programme funding, and to approve delegation to officers to allocate the funding in line with the Derby and Derbyshire Clinical Commissioning Group terms as outlined in the grant. The third item within the report is in relation to 1 Abbey Yard, and that is the declaration of a surplus asset. 1 Abbey Yard is a small residential property which previously formed part of the council's portfolio to secure tenancies, but it's recently become vacant following the death of the tenant. So there's a recommendation in the report to declare this property as surplus and to offer the property for sale on the open market. Fourthly, within the report is the Household Support Fund. The Council has been awarded a Household Support Fund of 2.224 million, and that's been made available to all upper tier councils, so that includes county councils and unitary authorities, and that's to support those most at need during the winter with food and energy bills. In 4.26 of the report, you can see the details of the proposals for the grant. £750,000 to allocate vouchers to all schools in Derby for free school meals during the term breaks between October and 21 and March 22. 1.4 million of funding will be used to provide financial contribution to the cost of energy, water and other related essentials in the form of a one-off voucher for vulnerable households, and £70,000 will be granted to support local schemes that already help vulnerable households. So the recommendation in the report is to approve the acceptance of the funding of 2.224 million for the household support grant. We do have, next in the report is details around Ravensdale decant costs. So following the fire at Ravensdale Infant and Nursery School on the 5th of October 2020, revenue costs were being incurred due to the temporary decanting period whilst the replacement school building were underway. And these indicative revenue decanting costs are currently estimated at £273,000. It's recommended in the report to approve the use of the Ravensdale Insurance Reserve to fund those indicative revenue decanting costs. And lastly, within the report, we have the Holiday Activities and Food Programme, which is extension of the Summer Promise Summer Scheme Programme that we had during the summer. The HAF programme aims to provide healthy food and enriching activities to children who are in receipt of free school meals. And there's funding from the DfE, and additional funding has been secured from the DfE to coordinate the free holiday provision. An updated grant determination letter has been received by the DFE in July 21, indicating that the City Council had received an allocation for a further £126,000 of contingency funding to help develop the winter half provision, and the funding is being made available for Derby to enable local groups to provide holiday activities, including food to children eligible for free school meals. In the report, it's recommended to note the acceptance of the DFE contingency grant of £126,000 for the half programme, for the winter programme, and a recommendation to agree that the CAD will continue to administer and deliver those with delivery partners to ensure access to holiday activities and food. And lastly, in the report is related to the Dedicated Schools Grant and the plan for the Dedicated Schools Grant Transformation Programme. That was originally approved in Cabinet in February 2020. What we do know is that in terms of delivery of the SEND reforms has proved a significant challenge within the Council, and the Council has experienced significant deficits and national demands for the EHCPs, the Education, Health and Care plans has increased by more than 70% in the last 12 months alone. Schools Forum have considered a transformation plan on their meeting on the 12th of October of this year, and there was unanimous agreement that this work should continue and should be funded from the DSG reserves. There's a recommendation in the report to approve the use of the DSG reserves up to a maximum of £930,000 to complete that high needs transformation programme, which includes award of a contract to Empower, who are a specialist consultancy agency in terms of delivering high needs transformation nationally, across lots of councils nationally, and the approval of a contract, award of a contract for £640,000 to be funded from those high DSG reserves as contained in the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Any comments or observations at all? Lucy.
Thank you. Three things. Firstly, who are Empower and why Empower?
So Empower is a specialist group that have worked alongside lots of local authorities on the SEND agenda. We have lots of reference points and have been in consultation and debate with those local authorities about the work that Empower have provided and the added value and capacity and knowledge that they've provided to that sector. So they are a consultative agency, but specialise in this area. And we do, like I say, Councillor Kerr, we do have some really good reference points about the impact that they're making, and Derby would like to learn from that experience and specialist knowledge.
Thank you, Alison. Did you want to come back, Lucy? You're looking quizzical.
Yeah, I just wondered why then there doesn't seem to have been, I can't see in the papers an explanation as to why we aren't going out to a more general offer, or, you know, we're not going out to the market for this. It seems to be a closed group, and I can't see a closed agreement, and I can't see that there has been a selection process behind this decision.
Okay, Alison, can you help, Lucy?
Yeah, it's a very small niche group in terms of the work that's happened. We have looked obviously across the national picture in terms of who could support us through that transformation programme. Empower are the market leaders in this area, and as I said earlier, they have a really good track record to deliver at pace with some specialist knowledge around this very niche area.
Thank you, Alison.
It's really the procedural matter here that I'm interested in. Not necessarily, I've got nothing against Empower, I don't know anything about them, but it's the procedure that I'm not quite sure about.
Alison, can you help Lucy again with that?
I would have to go back to look at the finer detail of what that process is for the award, that procurement
process. Is this something that may have to be resolved outside of this chamber? If you can
I'd have to get the details of the process, Lucy.
Converse,
I'm not close enough.
I think it would be helpful if Cabinet could be told how procedurally this has gone on.
Okay, so what you're asking is for Alison to look into that and then be prepared for tomorrow evening to advise Cabinet. I understand, Lisa, that's a positive suggestion.
The second thing, Chair, is regarding 1 Abbey Yard, which it's noted in the papers under the climate implications that probably 1 Abbey Yard needs quite a lot of work doing to it to bring it up to an appropriate environmental standard. And I think it's actually a responsibility that we have as the current owners of that property to ensure that this is a unit of accommodation within the city that is brought up to a good standard of energy efficiency. We, as part of our responsibilities in terms of climate change and our climate emergency. So I've got a recommendation, Chair, which I'll come to shortly. I've just almost finished it, so that we don't neglect our duty in ensuring that people can live in that property in future in an energy efficient manner. So I don't think there's an comment on that one. But the other point I would just make is also on climate, and it's just in terms of the climate implications, which doesn't mention the HAF scheme, where we've got food being provided to young people, and for both an inclusive environment and for a lower carbon meal, we should be talking about vegetarian meals and not meat meals, because we know that meat has a higher carbon footprint than vegetables, if you just have to watch a few Tesco adverts to know that. But also, it means that we haven't got an issue about whether the meat being offered is halal or not. So it's more inclusive culturally as well. And if that hasn't been included in the specification for the HAF funds, then can we make sure it is? Is that something that can be taken away, or would you like a recommendation on that one as well?
Okay, do you want to come back, Alison, in terms of...
Yeah, I don't know the details of the scheme, so I can take that. I can take that away.
Get some more details, and then take up with regard to the briefing cabinet tomorrow. Councillor Martin.
Sorry, I may not have quite. That took me by surprise, actually. What Councillor Kerr just said then. So, are you suggesting, Councillor Kerr, that all the meals should be vegetarian, or that there ought to be a vegetarian option?
There should certainly be a vegetarian option to be available, accessible to everybody, but also I'd say that on climate change issues, then all meals should be vegetarian. We do have at least one school in the city, and I think it's more than one, where vegetarian meals are the standard school dinner, because that is inclusive.
I think this is going to be down to individual schools, I guess, and governors. Alison, over to you.
Well, look, I've been largely vegetarian since I was 18 years old, and I'm deeply concerned about climate change. But I just think that, this is a scheme to help some of the most deprived children in the city. And whilst, and some cultures, every time I go to a Sikh event, sorry, I'm not being, hang on, I'll start again. What do I think? I think that although I'm sympathetic to the vegetarian cause, some cultures are vegetarian, etc. I think that I just think we shouldn't really include any prescription about it being, these meals being mainly vegetarian. I think that is too complicated, too much, and adding too many requirements to a scheme which is trying to help already, some of the most deprived children in the city. And I think if we're going to start saying all vegetarian, we'll start with some of the more privileged people who, overall, whose carbon output is usually much higher. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to go forward with your recommendation, please, Lucy, and then I'll put it to the meeting.
Recommendation to Cabinet that to show leadership in climate change mitigation, or possibly it should say action, 1 Abbey Yard is brought up to a good standard of energy efficiency by Derby Homes before letting as social housing or offering for sale.
Okay. Do you have a seconder for that at all? Councillor Carr seconded that. So do you want to... You heard the recommendation?
Thank you, Chair. All those in favour?
Please show.
So 2 in favour, Chair. All those against?
Those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 against. 2 in favour, 6 against.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We've dealt with item 15 by Sarah Walker early on, so we're now into item 16, which is the exclusion of the press and public, before we deal with confidential items. Stephen, do you want to...
Thank you, Chair. So item 16 is for you to consider a resolution to exclude the press and public during consideration of the following items. That under section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the meeting during discussion of the following items on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraphs 3 and 5 of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act, and that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Gamail, this is item 17 on Landau 40. I'll leave it you to kick off.